The night was cold, colder than Michelle expected. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel as she drove down the empty highway outside Atlanta. Her old sedan rattled noisily, protesting every mile they traveled. Beside her, in the passenger seat, sat her 6-year-old son Jamal fast asleep. In the back seat, her 8-year-old daughter Tasha hummed softly to herself while clutching her favorite stuffed bear. Michelle glanced at them in the rearview mirror, her heart swelling with love and responsibility. They were her world, her reason for pushing through even the toughest days. She had just finished her second job of the day, a late shift at a diner where she worked as a waitress, and now all she wanted was to get home, tuck the kids into bed, and collapse onto the couch. But fate seemed to have other plans. As she rounded a bend in the road, the car sputtered violently before coming to a grinding halt. Michelle groaned, gripping the wheel tightly as if sheer willpower could restart the engine. "Mommy?" Tasha's voice broke the silence. "Why? Did we stop?" "It's okay, baby," Michelle said, trying to mask her frustration. "The car just needs a little rest." She turned off the ignition and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The highway stretched endlessly in both directions, flanked by barren trees shedding their last leaves. There was no sign of civilization nearby. No gas stations, no houses, nothing but darkness and the occasional flicker of a distant street lamp. Pulling her hoodie closer around her, Michelle walked to the front of the car and popped the hood. Underneath, the dim glow of the headlights, she stared at the tangled mess of wires and metal. Cars passed by occasionally, their drivers either too busy or too indifferent to notice her predicament. Michelle sighed, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders. She reached for her phone only to realize that the battery was dead. Of course it would be dead tonight. "Great," she muttered under her breath, slamming the hood shut in frustration. Just then, a low rumble interrupted the quiet night. A sleek black sports car slowed down beside hers, its headlights illuminating the desolate stretch of road. For a moment, Michelle hesitated, unsure whether to feel relieved or wary. Strangers didn't usually stop to help people like her. Not here, not on this lonely highway. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a man in his late 40s. He wore a leather jacket and tailored slacks, his face partially hidden in shadow. Despite his polished appearance, there was something approachable about him. "You look like you could use some help," he said, his voice calm and steady. Michelle hesitated again. "I don't want to bother you," she replied cautiously. "It's probably just something minor." The man chuckled lightly. "Trust me, I've dealt with my fair share of car trouble. Let me take a look." He stepped out of the car, moving with confidence. Up close, Michelle noticed the sharp lines of his jaw and the kindness in his eyes. He introduced himself as Daniel Harper, though his name meant little to her. To her surprise, he didn't seem impatient or condescending. Instead, he approached the problem with genuine curiosity. Together, they opened the hood once more. Daniel examined the engine carefully, pointing out issues that Michelle hadn't noticed before. "Looks like your alternator belt snapped," he explained. "That's why the car died completely." Michelle nodded, pretending to understand more than she actually did. "Is it easy to fix?" Daniel smiled reassuringly. "Not exactly easy, but doable. Lucky for you, I always carry tools in my trunk." As he retrieved a toolbox from his car, Michelle couldn't help but feel a pang of gratitude. Most people wouldn't go out of their way to help a stranger, especially not someone who looked like her. She knew how the world worked. She'd faced enough prejudice to recognize it when it came knocking. Yet here was Daniel, treating her with respect and kindness without hesitation. While Daniel worked on the engine, Michelle struck up a conversation to pass the time. "You must be pretty handy with cars," she remarked. "I've picked up a few things over the years," he replied modestly, "though I mostly leave the heavy lifting to professionals these days." "What do you do, if you don't mind me asking?" Daniel paused briefly before answering. "I run a tech company. Nothing too exciting, really." Michelle raised an eyebrow. "Tech? That sounds pretty important." He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the topic. "It pays the bills. What about you? You're working late tonight. Michelle laughed softly. Yeah, I'm juggling a couple of jobs right now. Waitressing during the day, cleaning offices at night. It keeps me busy, but it's worth it for my kids. Daniel glanced toward the car, where Tasha was still humming softly. They're lucky to have a mom like you. His words caught Michelle off guard. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not from strangers. Thanks, she murmured, looking away to hide her blush. After a few more minutes of tinkering, Daniel managed to get the engine running again. The sound of it roaring back to life brought a wave of relief washing over Michelle. You're amazing, she said sincerely. I can't thank you enough. It's no big deal, Daniel replied with a dismissive wave. Just glad I could help. As Michelle prepared to leave, Daniel extended his hand. Take care of yourself, Michelle. She shook his hand firmly, grateful for his kindness. But as she turned to walk back to her car, something caught Daniel's eye. His gaze dropped to her left hand where a simple silver ring rested on her finger. His expression froze, confusion flashing across his face. Where did you get that ring? He asked abruptly, his tone sharp and urgent. Michelle blinked, startled by the sudden change in his demeanor. It belonged to my husband, she explained, slowly. He passed away a few years ago. Daniel's brow furrowed, his mind racing. The ring, it wasn't just any piece of jewelry. It bore the insignia of a secret organization he thought long disbanded. How could Michelle possibly have it? And what did it mean? For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night grew quieter, the weight of unanswered questions hanging heavily between them. Little did Michelle know, this chance encounter would set off a chain of events that would change her life forever. Michelle couldn't shake off the strange feeling that lingered after Daniel's abrupt question about her ring. His tone had shifted so suddenly, from warm and helpful to sharp and urgent, that it left her unsettled. She glanced at the ring. On her finger, its simple design glinting faintly in the dim streetlight. It was more than just jewelry. It was one of the few things Marcus had left behind when he disappeared 5 years ago. What's wrong with the ring? Michelle asked cautiously, her voice tinged with suspicion. It belonged to my husband. Why does it matter? Daniel hesitated, clearly torn between saying too much or too little. He ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. Finally, he sighed and said, Can we talk somewhere private? This isn't the kind of conversation you want to have on the side of the road. Michelle frowned, unsure whether to trust him, but something in his eyes, urgency mixed with genuine concern, made her nod reluctantly. Okay, she said slowly, but I need to get my kids home first. Of course, Daniel replied quickly. I'll follow you to make sure your car doesn't break down again. Then we can meet somewhere safe. With that settled, Michelle climbed back into her sedan, her thoughts swirling. What could possibly be so significant about Marcus's ring? As she drove home, Tasha chattered happily about school while Jamal slept soundly in the passenger seat. Normally, Michelle would have found comfort in their voices, but tonight, her mind was elsewhere. After dropping the kids off at their small apartment and tucking them into bed, Michelle met Daniel at a quiet cafe near downtown Atlanta. The place was nearly empty, save for a barista wiping down counters and a couple sitting in the corner. Daniel chose a secluded booth, sliding a folder onto the table as Michelle sat across from him. I know this might sound crazy, Daniel began, his voice low but steady. But that ring, it's connected to something bigger than you realize. Michelle crossed her arms, her defenses rising. What do you mean, bigger? My husband gave me this ring before he died. That's all there is to it. Daniel leaned forward, his expression serious. Did Marcus ever tell you what he really did for work? Michelle shook her head. He said he worked for the government, but he never went into detail. He was always traveling, always secretive. When he disappeared, they told me he died during some mission overseas. They didn't explain anything beyond that. Daniel nodded as if he'd expected her answer. That's because what Marcus was involved in wasn't supposed to exist, not officially anyway. He opened the folder and slid out a stack of documents filled with photos, maps, and handwritten notes. At the center of everything was an image of a group of people standing together, each wearing rings identical to Michelle's. This, Daniel said, tapping the photo, was part of a covert program called Project Sentinel. Its goal was to protect Earth from extraterrestrial threats. People like Marcus were recruited based on their skills and loyalty. They weren't soldiers. They were problem solvers, trained to handle situations most people couldn't even imagine. Michelle stared at the photo, her heart pounding. She recognized Marcus instantly, standing tall beside others who looked equally determined. Her throat tightened as memories flooded back. The long absences, the cryptic phone calls, the way Marcus sometimes woke up screaming from nightmares he refused to talk about. But if this program was so secret, Michelle asked finally, her voice trembling, why are you telling me now? Because something went wrong, Daniel admitted. 5 years ago, during a critical mission, the team encountered something unnatural. A piece of alien technology that shouldn't have existed. The extraction went sideways, and communication was lost. Official reports claimed everyone perished, but he trailed off, his gaze dropping to the ring on Michelle's finger. But what? Michelle pressed, leaning closer. But I think Marcus survived, Daniel finished quietly. And I think whoever has that artifact now knows it. Michelle felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her feet. Alien technology? Covert missions? None of it made sense, yet deep down, she couldn't deny the truth in Daniel's words. All those unanswered questions about Marcus's life and death suddenly took on new meaning. If Marcus survived, Michelle whispered, why didn't he come back to us? To me and the kids? That's what we need to find out, Daniel said firmly. If he entrusted you with that ring, it means he wanted you to know the truth someday. Maybe he thought you'd recognize its importance. Or maybe... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Maybe he was trying to protect you. The weight of Daniel's words hit Michelle like a tidal wave. Protect her from what? From whom? She looked at the ring again, studying the insignia etched into its surface. It seemed so ordinary. Yet now she understood it held secrets far beyond anything she'd imagined. So what happens now? Michelle asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We investigate, Daniel replied without hesitation. Together. If Marcus was involved in something this big, there's a trail somewhere. And if someone's using that artifact for their own gain, we need to stop them. Michelle hesitated, torn between fear and determination. This wasn't the life she'd chosen. It was the life Marcus had been pulled into. But she owed it to him, to their children, to uncover the truth. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. All right, let's do it. As they left the cafe, Michelle couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, half expecting someone to be watching them. The night air felt heavier now, charged with the knowledge that her world was about to change forever. Daniel noticed her unease and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're not alone in this, he said softly. We'll figure it out together. For the first time since Marcus's disappearance, Michelle felt a flicker of hope. Whatever lay ahead, she knew she had to face it. Not just for herself, but for the family she loved. And though the path promised danger and uncertainty, she also knew it was the only way to bring closure to the mysteries surrounding Marcus's fate. Little did she know, their investigation would lead them deeper into a web of conspiracy and betrayal than either of them could have anticipated. But for now, all Michelle could focus on was taking the next step, one that would take her closer to answers, and perhaps to justice for the man she had loved and lost. The next morning, Michelle woke up feeling like she'd stepped into a world she didn't recognize. Her small apartment seemed quieter than usual, the familiar hum of daily life replaced by the weight of unanswered questions. She glanced at her kids sleeping peacefully in their beds and felt a pang of guilt. How could she explain any of this to them? For now, she decided it was better to keep it to herself. They deserved normalcy, even if she couldn't have it. After getting the kids ready for school, Michelle met Daniel at a safe house he'd arranged, a nondescript building tucked away in an industrial part of town. Inside, the air smelled faintly of mildew, and the furniture looked like it had seen better days. But none of that mattered. What caught Michelle's attention was the wall covered in photos, maps, and scribbled notes. It looked like something out of a detective movie. "This is everything I've gathered so far," Daniel said, gesturing toward the wall. "It's not much, but it's a start." Michelle walked closer, her eyes scanning the chaos of information. There were pictures of Marcus alongside other team members, satellite images of remote locations, and sketches of what looked like some kind of device. At the center of it all was a blueprint of an object shaped like a jagged sphere, its surface etched with intricate patterns. "What's that?" Michelle asked, pointing to the sphere. "That," Daniel replied grimly, "is the artifact your husband's team was sent to retrieve. According to reports, it's a piece of alien technology, capable of, well, we're not entirely sure. Some say it can manipulate energy, others think it has the power to alter reality itself." Michelle stared at the image, her stomach churning. "And you think someone still has it?" Daniel nodded. "After the mission went south, the artifact disappeared. Whoever took it must have known how valuable it was, and if they figured out how to use it—" He let the sentence hang unfinished, but Michelle understood the implication. "So where do we start?" she asked, determination creeping into her voice. Daniel handed her a folder filled with names and addresses. "These are former members of Project Sentinel who might know more about what happened. Most of them went off-grid after the program, disbanded, but I've managed to track down a few leads." Michelle flipped through the pages, her heart sinking. Each name came with a story. People whose lives had been shattered by secrets they weren't allowed to share. She couldn't help but wonder how many of them were still alive. Their first stop was a mechanic shop on the outskirts of the city. The owner, a grizzled man named Greg, had once been part of Marcus's unit. When they arrived, he was bent over an engine, grease smeared across his hands and face. At first glance, he didn't seem like someone involved in intergalactic missions, but appearances could be deceiving. "Greg," Daniel said cautiously, stepping forward. "We need to talk." Greg straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes narrowed as he studied them. "You look familiar," he muttered, pointing at Daniel. "Weren't you one of Harper's boys?" "I used to work with Marcus too," Daniel admitted. "This is Michelle, his wife." At the mention of Marcus's name, Greg's expression softened. He motioned for them to follow him into a back office cluttered with tools and spare parts. Once inside, he locked the door and pulled down the blinds. "What do you want to know?" Greg asked, his tone guarded. "We're trying to find out what really happened during the extraction mission," Daniel explained. "Anything you can tell us would help." Greg hesitated, lighting a cigarette before speaking. "That mission was cursed from the start. The artifact, it wasn't just lying around waiting to be picked up. It fought back. Every time we got close, things went wrong. Equipment failed, people got hurt." Michelle leaned forward, her voice trembling. "Did anyone survive besides Marcus?" Greg exhaled a cloud of smoke. "Officially, no, but rumors circulated afterward. Some said Marcus made it out alive. Others claimed he stayed behind to buy the rest of us time to escape. Either way, no one heard from him again." Michelle clenched her fists, fighting back tears. She wanted to believe Marcus was alive, but the uncertainty was eating away at her. "Do you know who took the artifact?" she asked. Greg shook his head. "Whoever it was, they covered their tracks well. All I know is that a private corporation has been sniffing around lately, asking questions about Project Sentinel. If I were you, I'd watch my back." The warning lingered in Michelle's mind as they left the shop. Whoever was looking for the artifact clearly wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone standing in their way. As they drove to their next lead, Michelle noticed a black SUV trailing them in the rear-view mirror. Its tinted windows made it impossible to see inside, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. "Daniel," she whispered urgently, "there's a car behind us. It's been there for blocks." Daniel glanced in the mirror, his jaw tightening. "Stay calm. Just keep driving." They wound through the streets, taking sharp turns and doubling back to see if the SUV would follow. Sure enough, it stayed on their tail, closing the distance with each passing second. Finally, Daniel pulled into an alleyway, cutting off the engine. The SUV screeched to a halt behind them, and three men dressed in dark suits climbed out, their movements deliberate and menacing. "Get out of the car," one of them ordered, his hand resting on the butt of a gun. Michelle's heart raced as she exchanged a glance with Daniel. Without saying a word, they both bolted from the car, darting into the maze of alleys. The men gave chase, their footsteps echoing loudly against the concrete walls. Michelle pushed herself harder than ever before, adrenaline fueling every step. She ducked under clotheslines and leapt over trash bins, her lungs burning with effort. Finally, they reached a dead end. Trapped, Michelle turned to face their pursuers, her back pressed against the cold brick wall. But before the men could reach them, a loud crash echoed through the alley. A metal dumpster toppled over, creating a distraction. In the confusion, Daniel grabbed Michelle's hand, pulling her through a narrow gap between two buildings. When they emerged on the other side, they found themselves in a bustling marketplace. The crowd swallowed them whole, providing cover as they slipped away unnoticed. Safe for now, they collapsed onto a bench, catching their breath. Who were those guys? Michelle panted, her chest heaving. "Mercenaries," Daniel replied, grimly. "Hired guns working for whoever wants the artifact." Michelle shook her head, overwhelmed by everything happening around her. "I don't understand why they're coming after us. We don't even have the artifact." "They don't know that," Daniel said. "All they know is that you have the ring. To them, that makes you a threat." As the reality of their situation sank in, Michelle realized there was no turning back. Whoever was behind this wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted, and that meant she and Daniel had to stay one step ahead. But with mercenaries on their trail and only fragments of information to guide them, the road ahead promised danger at every turn. Despite the fear gnawing at her insides, Michelle felt a spark of resolve ignite within her. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about protecting her family and honoring Marcus's memory. No matter what it took, she vowed to see this through to the end. Little did she know, their search would soon lead them to a revelation that would change everything they thought they knew about Marcus, the artifact, and the shadowy forces hunting them. Michelle and Daniel spent the next few days moving cautiously, always looking over their shoulders. Every shadow seemed darker, every noise louder. They knew they were being hunted, but they couldn't let fear stop them. Not when so much was at stake. Their search led them to an old contact of Marcus's, a former programmer named Elena, who had worked on decoding data related to the artifact. She lived in a small apartment above a laundromat, her windows covered with heavy curtains to block out prying eyes. When Michelle and Daniel knocked on her door, she peeked through the peephole before reluctantly letting them in. Elena was younger than Michelle expected, probably in her mid-20s with messy brown hair and glasses perched on her nose. Her living room was cluttered with computers, wires, and half-empty coffee cups. Despite the chaos, there was a sharp intelligence in her eyes as she studied them. "You're Marcus's wife," Elena said finally, her voice soft but steady. "I'm sorry about what happened to him." Michelle nodded, unsure how to respond. She didn't know this woman, but something about her tone felt sincere. "We need your help," Daniel interjected. "We're trying to track down the artifact." "Do you know anything about it?" Elena hesitated, glancing nervously toward the window. "You shouldn't be asking these questions. People have disappeared for less." "We don't have a choice," Michelle said firmly. "Someone is using that thing for their own gain, and we need to stop them." After a long pause, Elena sighed and sat down at one of her computers. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up encrypted files and maps. "The artifact wasn't just a random piece of alien tech," she explained. "It's part of something bigger, a network of devices, scattered across the planet. If someone activates it without understanding how it works, it could destabilize entire regions." "Destabilize how?" Daniel asked, leaning closer. "It manipulates energy fields," Elena replied. "Think earthquakes, power surges, even shifts in reality." The team Marcus worked with was supposed to secure it and figure out its purpose. But after the mission failed, whoever took the artifact has been trying to reverse engineer it. Michelle's stomach churned. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about preventing a catastrophe. "Do you know where it is now?" she asked. Elena shook her head. "Not exactly, but I can give you coordinates to a facility where they might be experimenting with it. Be careful, though. That place is crawling with guards." With the new lead in hand, Michelle and Daniel prepared for what lay ahead. They gathered supplies, flashlights, rope, and basic tools, and mapped out a plan to infiltrate the facility. It wasn't going to be easy, but they didn't have time to wait. That night, they approached the facility under the cover of darkness. Located deep in the woods, it looked like an abandoned factory from the outside, but they knew better. Motion, sensors and cameras lined the perimeter, and armed guards patrolled the grounds. Michelle's heart pounded as they slipped past the first layer of security, sticking to the shadows. Inside, the air was cold and stale, filled with the hum of machinery. They followed Elena's map, navigating narrow hallways until they reached a locked door marked with hazard symbols. Daniel picked the lock quickly, and they stepped into a large chamber dominated by a glowing pedestal at its center. The artifact sat atop the pedestal, pulsating with a faint blue light. Its jagged edges caught the dim illumination, making it look almost alive. Michelle stared at it, mesmerized by its otherworldly beauty, but there was no time to admire it. They needed answers. As Daniel examined the device, Michelle noticed movement out of the corner of her eye. Mercenaries poured into the room, surrounding them with weapons drawn. At the front stood a tall man in a suit, his expression cold and calculating. "Well, well," he sneered. "Look who decided to crash the party." Daniel stepped protectively in front of Michelle, his voice calm despite the danger. "Who are you?" "The name's Victor Kane," the man replied, "and you've got something that belongs to us." Michelle clenched her fists, anger bubbling beneath her fear. "This isn't yours to take. You don't even know what it does." Victor smirked. "Oh, we know enough, and once we unlock its full potential, nothing will stand in our way." Before either side could make a move, the artifact began to glow, brighter, its energy crackling like static electricity. Alarms blared throughout the facility, red lights flashing wildly. The mercenaries exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unprepared for whatever was happening. "What's going on?" Michelle shouted, panic rising in her chest. "It's activating," Daniel yelled. "We need to get out of here." But escaping wouldn't be easy. The mercenaries opened fire, forcing Michelle and Daniel to dive behind cover. Bullets ricocheted off metal surfaces as they scrambled to find an exit. Michelle grabbed a loose pipe from the floor, swinging it like a bat to fend off anyone who got too close. Just as things seemed hopeless, a familiar voice echoed through the chaos. "Michelle, over here." She turned to see Greg, the mechanic, from earlier, standing near a side door, gesturing frantically for them to follow. Without hesitation, she and Daniel bolted toward him, dodging bullets and debris. Behind them, the artifact erupted in a burst of light, sending shockwaves rippling through the room. They barely made it outside before the facility collapsed in on itself, swallowed by flames and smoke. Gasping for air, Michelle collapsed onto the ground, her body trembling with exhaustion. Greg knelt beside her, his face grim. "You okay?" he asked gruffly. Michelle nodded weakly. "What are you doing here?" "I heard Victor's crew was sniffing around," Greg admitted. "Figured you two might need backup." Daniel joined them, his expression dark. "That artifact, it's still active. If Victor survived, he'll come after it again." Michelle looked at the burning wreckage, her mind racing. She had come so far, risked so much, and yet the answers remained just out of reach. But one thing was clear. Giving up wasn't an option. "We'll find another way," she said resolutely. "Whatever it takes." Greg nodded in agreement. "You're not alone in this. There are others like us, people who want to stop Victor and his kind. We'll help however we can." For the first time since this nightmare began, Michelle felt a flicker of hope. With allies by her side and a renewed sense of purpose, she was ready to face whatever came next. The road ahead would be dangerous, but she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't stop until the truth came to light, and justice was served. Little did she know, their next discovery would bring them closer to Marcus than ever before, and reveal the ultimate sacrifice he had made to protect the world. After narrowly escaping the burning facility, Michelle, Daniel, and Greg found themselves hiding deep in the woods, far from prying eyes. The air was thick with humidity, and the sound of crickets filled the silence as they regrouped near a makeshift campfire. None of them had spoken much since the explosion, each lost in their own thoughts. The weight of what they'd seen and survived was heavy, but Michelle couldn't afford to dwell on it. She needed answers. "Greg," she said finally, breaking the quiet. "You mentioned others like us. Who are they?" Greg stirred the fire with a stick, his expression guarded. "Former members of Project Sentinel. After the program disbanded, some of us stuck together. We kept tabs on anyone who might try to misuse the artifact." Michelle nodded slowly. "And you think Marcus was one of you?" Greg hesitated before answering. "Marcus didn't just disappear after the mission failed. He went underground. From what I heard, he was trying to keep the artifact out of the wrong hands." Daniel leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "If he's still alive, where would he be?" "That's the million-dollar question," Greg muttered. "But if I were him, I'd head somewhere remote, a place no one could find me. Somewhere safe enough to hide the artifact until the time was right." Michelle's heart raced at the thought of seeing Marcus again. Could it really be possible? All these years, she'd grieved him as dead, but now hope flickered inside her chest. "Do you know where that might be?" she asked, her voice trembling. Greg shook his head. "Not exactly. But there's someone who might. A guy named Hank. He used to run logistics for the team. If anyone knows where Marcus went, it's him." Without wasting another moment, they set off toward Hank's location, a secluded cabin nestled high in the Appalachian Mountains. The journey was long and grueling, winding through treacherous roads and steep trails. By the time they arrived, exhaustion clung to them like a second skin. But none of that mattered when Hank opened the door. Hank was older than Greg, with a scruffy beard and weary eyes that betrayed years of carrying secrets too heavy to bear. He eyed them warily, his hand resting on the shotgun slung over his shoulder. "What do you want?" he growled. "We're looking for Marcus," Michelle said bluntly, stepping forward. "We think he's alive and we need to find him." Hank's grip tightened on the gun, but his gaze softened slightly when he looked at Michelle. "You're his wife," he said quietly. "I heard about you, about your kids." Michelle swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "Please, Hank, if you know anything, tell us. This isn't just about me, it's about stopping whoever's trying to use the artifact for their own gain." For a long moment, Hank said nothing. Then, with a sigh, he stepped aside and motioned for them to come in. Inside, the cabin was cluttered with maps, notebooks, and dusty equipment. On the table lay a photo of the original Project Sentinel team, including Marcus, Hank, and several others Michelle didn't recognize. "He's alive," Hank admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "But not for much longer if you don't hurry." "What do you mean?" Daniel asked sharply. Hank pointed to a map pinned to the wall. "After the mission went south, Marcus took the artifact and hid it in an old bunker. He stayed behind to make sure no one else got to it. But the energy from the artifact, it's unstable, it's killing him." Michelle's knees nearly buckled beneath her. Her mind raced with questions, fears, and a desperate need to see Marcus, to hold him, to hear his voice one last time. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice cracking. Hank traced a route on the map leading to a remote valley surrounded by cliffs. "The bunker's hidden under an old mine shaft. Getting there won't be easy, and Victor's men are probably already on their way. If you're going, you'll need to move fast." They left the cabin at dawn, driving as quickly as the rugged terrain allowed. Along the way, Michelle replayed every memory of Marcus. The laughter, the arguments, the quiet moments shared in the dark. She had spent so many nights wondering if he'd ever loved her enough to come home. Now she understood. His sacrifice had been for her, for their children, for everyone. When they reached the mine shaft, the entrance was partially collapsed, blocked by fallen rocks and debris. Greg and Daniel worked tirelessly to clear a path while Michelle paced anxiously nearby. Every second felt like an eternity, the fear of losing Marcus again gnawing at her insides. Finally, they broke through. The air inside was damp and cold, the walls lined with rusted metal beams. As they descended deeper into the earth, the faint hum of energy grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. At the end of the tunnel, they found him. Marcus looked frail, his once strong frame weakened by illness. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow, but his eyes lit up when he saw Michelle. Tears streamed down her face as she ran to him, wrapping her arms around him despite his protests. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse. "I wanted to come back to you, to them, but I couldn't risk it." "You should have trusted me," Michelle choked out, clutching him tightly. "We could have faced this together." Marcus shook his head weakly. "Not this. Not something like this." He gestured toward the artifact sitting on a pedestal in the center of the room, its glow pulsating erratically. "It's too dangerous, too powerful." Daniel stepped forward, his expression grim. "We need to neutralize it. If it destabilizes any further, it could destroy everything within miles." Marcus nodded painfully. "That's why I stayed. I've been working on a way to stabilize the energy, but I don't have much time left. You'll need to finish what I started." "No," Michelle said firmly, shaking her head. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Marcus replied, his voice firm despite his condition. "This is my choice, my responsibility." Before Michelle could argue further, the sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnels. Victor and his mercenaries had found them. Time was running out. With Marcus guiding them, Daniel and Greg worked frantically to adjust the settings on the artifact, stabilizing its energy field. Meanwhile, Michelle helped Marcus stand, supporting him as best she could. The mercenaries stormed into the chamber, weapons raised, but Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between them and the others. "Leave them alone," he commanded, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "This ends now," Victor sneered. "You're in no position to negotiate." Marcus ignored him, turning instead to Michelle. "Take care of our kids," he said softly, his eyes filled with love and regret. "Tell them I'm proud of them." Then, without warning, Marcus activated the artifact, channeling its energy into a final burst of power. The room erupted in blinding light, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. When the glow faded, Marcus was gone, leaving only silence in his wake. Michelle sank to her knees, her body racked with sobs. Around her, the others stood in stunned silence, the weight of Marcus's sacrifice settling over them like a heavy blanket. Though the immediate threat had been neutralized, the cost had been immeasurable. Michelle knew life would never be the same, but neither would the world Marcus had saved. And in that knowledge, she found a small measure of peace. Little did she know, the legacy of Marcus's bravery would inspire a new chapter, not just for her family, but for humanity itself. Months passed after Marcus's sacrifice, and life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm for Michelle. Though the pain of losing him again, this time knowing he was truly gone, still lingered, she found strength in the memories they shared and the legacy he left behind. Every day felt like a delicate balancing act between grief and gratitude, but Michelle refused to let despair define her. She owed it to Marcus, to their children, and to herself to keep moving forward. The artifact had been neutralized, its dangerous energy contained thanks to Marcus's final act of courage. With Greg and Daniel's help, Michelle exposed Victor Kane and his corporation, ensuring that justice was served for those affected by their greed. The media hailed her as a hero, but Michelle shied away from the attention. To her, the real heroes were the people who had given everything, including Marcus, to protect humanity from forces beyond comprehension. Her days now revolved around raising Jamal and Tasha, who were growing up fast. They still asked about their father sometimes, and Michelle told them stories about Marcus's bravery, painting him as the hero he truly was. She showed them the ring he'd left behind, explaining how it symbolized love, sacrifice, and hope. It became a cherished keepsake, a reminder of the man who had fought so hard to make the world safer for everyone. Daniel remained a constant presence in Michelle's life. After everything they'd been through together, their bond had grown into something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared experiences. He used his wealth and influence to support causes close to Michelle's heart, funding initiatives to help families impacted by loss and secrecy. Together, they worked tirelessly to ensure that no one else would have to endure the kind of pain Michelle had faced. One sunny Saturday morning, Michelle stood on the porch of their new home, a cozy house with a big backyard where Jamal and Tasha could play freely. She held Marcus's ring tightly in her hand, staring at it as sunlight glinted off its surface. For so long, it had been a mystery, a burden even, but now it felt like a beacon of hope. It reminded her not only of Marcus's sacrifice, but also of the extraordinary strength found in ordinary people when faced with the unknown. Behind her, Daniel leaned against the doorway, watching quietly. "You okay?" he asked gently. Michelle nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah, just thinking." "About Marcus?" "About everything," she admitted. "How far we've come. How much has changed." Daniel stepped closer, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He'd be proud of you, you know. Of all of us." Michelle turned to face him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I think he'd be proud of you too. You've done so much good since everything happened." Daniel shrugged modestly. "It's the least I can do. After all, Marcus gave his life to protect ours. The least we can do is honor that." For a moment they stood in silence, listening to the laughter of Jamal and Tasha as they chased each other around the yard. Their joy was infectious, filling the air with warmth and light. Michelle felt a surge of gratitude for her children, for Daniel, and for the second chance at life that Marcus's sacrifice had given them. Later that afternoon, Michelle sat down with Jamal and Tasha, pulling out an old photo album she'd recently rediscovered. Inside were pictures of Marcus from before the mission, smiling broadly as he held his newborn son or played tag with his daughter. Michelle flipped through the pages slowly, sharing stories about the man in the photos. "This is your daddy," she said softly, pointing to a picture of Marcus grinning ear to ear. "He loved you both more than anything in the world. And even though he couldn't always be here with us, he did everything he could to keep us safe." Jamal frowned thoughtfully. "Was Daddy a superhero?" Michelle chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "In a way, yes. He was brave and selfless, just like a superhero." Tasha reached out to touch the photo, her expression serious. "I wish I could meet him." Michelle pulled her daughter into a hug, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I wish you could too, baby. But Daddy's love will always be with us. It's in our hearts, in this house, and in every happy moment we share." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Michelle felt a sense of peace wash over her. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was full of moments worth cherishing. Through the darkness she had found light, and through loss she had discovered resilience. That night, as she tucked Jamal and Tasha into bed, Michelle placed Marcus's ring on the nightstand beside her own bed. She didn't need to wear it anymore. Its purpose had been fulfilled. It had guided her to the truth, connected her to allies, and ultimately led her to a place of healing. Now it simply served as a reminder that love transcends even the greatest challenges. Lying awake in the quiet darkness, Michelle reflected on the journey she'd taken. From a single mom struggling to make ends meet to a woman who had faced alien artifacts and shadowy conspiracies, she had come so far. Along the way, she'd learned that true strength wasn't about facing danger alone. It was about leaning on others, finding courage in community, and believing in the power of hope. And as sleep finally claimed her, Michelle dreamed of Marcus. Not as the broken man she'd seen in the bunker, but as the vibrant, loving husband and father she remembered. In her dream, he smiled at her, his eyes filled with pride and love. "You did good, Michelle," he said softly. "Take care of them." When she woke the next morning, the sun streaming through her window, Michelle knew what she had to do. She got dressed, kissed her kids goodbye, and headed out to volunteer at a local community center Daniel had helped establish. There she met other families who had lost loved ones to secrets and lies, and together, they began building a network of support and understanding. Though the artifact's secrets remained buried deep beneath the earth, its impact lingered in the lives it touched. For Michelle, it had been a catalyst for change, not just in the world around her, but within herself. She had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to create a future worthy of the sacrifices made to protect it. And as she looked out at the smiling faces of her children, Michelle knew that Marcus's legacy lived on, not just in the stories she told, but in the love and hope she carried forward every single day.